Kindergarten Daf Pesachim Daf Memches. Begin 12 lines down at the top of the oven. We're in the middle of a discussion regarding a machlekes between Rav Chisda and Rabbah from the previous stuff regarding if someone went and cooked food from Yom Tov to a weekday, if he gets lashes or not, which we explained the halachic principle underlying that if you say hoil or not, since if guests would come, then there wouldn't be a problem. So now also I'm not going to get lashes. So Gemara continues and tries to show that that's a machlekes Tanah. Shiur sponsored by Pesachim Daf. Krishna was joining us for today's daf. Something we're going to discuss in today's daf is, as we mentioned, this machlekes Amirom regarding hoil. If the Gemara tries to show that that's a machlekes Tanoim from our Mishnah regarding hafrashas challah that is tamei on Yom Tov. The Gemara gets into a discussion regarding the maximum amount of dough that's permissible to bake on Pesach at one time. That it shouldn't be a concern if you're doing too much dough that it's going to become chametz, you won't be able to bake it in time. Then the next mission discusses how women can avoid chametz problems when baking together on Pesach. You have many women that they're doing their dough together. You have to do it in a process that's going to avoid the problem of chametz. And then the following mission discusses different steps in the process of a dough turning into chametz. There's already the stages of what we consider quasi chametz and things like that. So the key terms and concepts we discuss in today's daf are hoil and mekabel archem chazal, the concept of hoil, which is since the guests would come, it would be fit for them. So therefore, I'm not violating doing malacha on Yom Tov, even though it's not, as the next concept, which is you're allowed to do malacha on Yom Tov, it's for the purposes of food, if it's for food consumption. Chomedos leikula is that sometimes it seems like a stringency, but it actually will lead to a leniency, and therefore that's not a stringency, and therefore you can't just be machmir. Hasam mitzvah from lechala is the concept that although one is supposed to separate challah when it's a dough, but you could also put it into the basket even when after it's baked, and then still considered contiguous, like one entity, and then you can still separate challah to give to the kohen. The concept we mentioned in the past, as long as you're still engaged in the dough, kneading it, braiding it, doing something with it, it's not going to become chametzik, and that's going to come into the concepts regarding when you have many women using the oven at the same time. So we said in the previous daf, if someone bakes from Yom Tov to the weekday, like we said, Rav Chisda says he gets lashes because you don't say hoil. Rabbah says you don't get lashes because you say hoil, since the guests will come would be fit for them. So that's how Gemara begins and says, Amar Rabbi Bacham. Says Had the Rav Chisda Rabbah that we mentioned in the previous stuff that they have a machlekes regarding Yom Tov if you can commit it from Yom Tov to the weekday, biblically at least, because of hoil or not. Says the Gemara, let's say it's a machlekes Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shuhi of our Mishnah. If you recall, our previous Mishnah was talking about it. Let's say someone has dough that's tamei on Yom Tov. Now you can't eat dough until you first separate challah. Problem is, if you're going to separate the challah, you're not going to be able to bake it. And so we had this difficulty. What do you do in that situation? So we had a machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua regarding the baking the tamei bread before hafrashas challah on Pesach. Now, we first point out that this is going to be important that when you have several loaves of baked bread, so many will separate one loaf as challah. Now, that should be usher to bake all the loaves on Yom Tov because one of them is going to be baked. Shaloi l'tzarich echol nefesh. Now, but technically what you could do is you could separate a small piece from each loaf, which would be mutter to bake all the loaves of Yom Tov, and then each loaf is baked l'tzarich echol nefesh, and that's going to come into the concept of this concept of hoil. And therefore the Gemara wants to show that the machlekes Rabbi Eliezer Meshua would be the machlekes Rabbi and Rav Chisda. As the Gemara explains. The Rabbi Eliezer that he says that you bake and then you call it challah, Savar, he holds amin and hoil. We say hoil, as we just explained. Since ultimately you're going to end up separating one of them as challah, comes out really that the effort that you put in, because that was the norm. The norm was that you would take off one of the challahs and give that to the kohen. So it comes out that really one of the loaves was you baked not for a purpose of echol nefesh. So really you shouldn't be allowed to go ahead. Rabbi Eliezer says bake it. It's not challah yet because challah it's tmei, has no utility. It's so you can't bake that. Bake them all. After you baked it, now go give one to the kohen. So that should be problematic because we know that you can end up making it not for echol nefesh. Even so, Rabbi Eliezer says you say hoil. If a person wants to, he doesn't have to separate a whole bilkala, a whole challah for the kohen to give us challah. He could break off a piece from each and every one, and you could say in each one it's really fit for the person for echol nefesh purposes, and you're allowed to bake it, and then you just have to take off a piece and give that to the kohen. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua, that he says no. That first you separate challah and then you leave it. You don't go ahead and you bake it. Sabi he holds loy min hoil. We don't say hoil to permit the malach of Yom Tov of baking, and therefore he says that you leave it. So seemingly there's a machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. There's a machlekes if you say hoil or not. Rabbi Yeshua doesn't say hoil, so it doesn't allow you to bake it before Parshas Challah. Rabbi Eliezer says you say Hayil. Yeah, so you can bake it all the loaves of Yom Tov, even though you're ultimately not going to do that, but Hayil. Since if technically I could, so it's like you did. I'm sure he says, no, you can't say such a thing. So that says the Gemara, no, not necessarily, and it's not necessarily from either side. We're going to reject it from either Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Papi says, but Dilma, maybe it's not like that. Maybe Ad Kam like Rabbi Eliezer Hasam, Damin Hayil. Where do we find Rabbi Eliezer says in Allah Chavar Mishnah that Hayil, this principle of, since if a person wanted to go ahead and separate pieces from each challah, they're different, a lot of big each dough on Yom Tov, even though it's tamei, because at the moment that you're putting in the dough into the oven, you could say, Kol chada v'chada chazalei today, each and every roll is fit for him, and that is like Rashi explains, that's without hayil. Because in each and every one, you could say, this is not the one that's going to be for challah. It's not necessarily so. It's not like it is, but technically hayil. No, each one could be the one. It's not hayil. Here, really, it's this, what you're baking or making or cooking is only fit for the guest, and you didn't invite guests. But for him it's not fit because he already ate his last meal, he's not eating anymore. We don't say hayil to permit even according to Rabbi Eliezer. So it's not necessarily true that Rabbi Eliezer holds hayil. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer would not say hayil in this case.
300.
And so to the other way also is also true. Amar Sheish B'ri Davidi says, maybe it's not like that. Ad kan lecham Rabbi Yeshua hasam do lo yamin hayil. Where do we find Yeshua that doesn't say hayil? Where he doesn't say that you could go ahead and bake it and then call it challah. He says no, you gotta call it challah and then you can't bake it. That's el deika chadar loichazir. That's because at least one of the rolls are actually not fit for him. Like we said, because the norm is that you separate one challah. Loyli didei b'loy loich. It's not for him, not for guests. Because like ultimately he said one of you are going to take his challah because it's not normal to go ahead and break off a piece from each and every one. Aval hachav Rabbi here were all of them. The chazi mias la'archim where whatever he's making is at least fit for the guests, and it is somewhat common for guests to come. And I would say that actually he would say hayil to go ahead and permit it even according to Yeshua. So therefore, says the Gemara, there's no raya, there's no proof over here that you would say that this is machlekes amaram is a machlekes tanaim, because could be that they would each agree that the cases are different, and therefore it's not necessarily machlekes tanaim. Now, Amru Rabban, so the rabbis, they had said this teaching of Rami Bachama that said that the machlekes of Rabbah and Rav Chizda regarding hayil, that this is the machlekes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah. They said this kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zer from the two great Talmudic sages, Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zer. Now Rabbi Yirmiyah Kibla, he accepted that this is the interpretation, and Rabbi Zer Kibla, he didn't accept it. Now Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zer, so one that accepted it said to the one that didn't accept it, he said, this we had a great difficulty for many years. But my plea, Rabbi Yeshua, we couldn't really understand what is this machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Because Rashi explains that if you recall on the previous Daf we had mentioned, so what is this machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Yeshua? So Rashi says that the reason why they had a difficulty was because to say that the machlekes of Taivas Hana is the benefit you have in the challah to decide who goes to, if that's money, you can't really, it's not sufficient to explain the machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Yeshua. Because although according to Rabbi Eliezer, you're going to say that Taivas Hana is money, so you're going to say, therefore according to him you can't just separate it because it's considered yours. Even so, but even now you should violate that on one of them that you're making challah, but you're still violating loisasa kamalacha. So better that you violate bayirah passively and not do an active isser of violating loisasa kamalacha. So it still doesn't explain how you understand. So okay, Tavis Nam moment. So you're right. So it's my dough. It's going to become chometzik because Tavis Nam moment. But so who let you go ahead and violate the malacha of baking? It's not for the purpose of Beichel Nefesh. So it still didn't really explain this machlekes. And Hashtam Rumish Medigaver Abba. Now we have a teaching in the name of a great teacher, Rami Bachama, that wants to tell us an explanation of this machlekes. If you say hayil or not. Rabbi Eliezer says hayil. So you can go ahead and bake it. Since technically, if I really wanted, I didn't have to take off one challah. I could take a break of each piece. And Rabbi Shua doesn't say hayil. And B'lein the Kabbalah, we're not going to accept it. This is finally explained in this machlekes we didn't understand for many years. So on that, Rabbi Zer said to him, he says, Heicha Kabbalah, how could I accept it? So Danin, like learn the Bryce, it's like a little bit of a discussion over here, a technical discussion where he's trying to show that you see from Rabbi Eliezer himself and Yeshua that they didn't really agree to this interpretation because the din we learned in the Bryce that elaborates on this machlekes. Only Yeshua said to Rabbi Eliezer. Lidvarecha, according to your opinion that you say that you first bake and then you call a challah, he's violating do malacha on Yom Tov of baking, which is not for Eichel Nevish purposes because no one's eating this. It's going to be challah, it's tamei, b'shasikle, and you see Rebbe Lezer was silent. Now, v'i is, and if it's true like Rambam Chama, then Rebbe Lezer should have responded. What do you mean? Time of the Dimishim Hayel. My explanation is because of there's no chil Yom Tov over here, there's no leisazik malacha. You're doing an Eichel Nefesh thing. It's not. Okay, but Hayel says as if it was. But obviously, you see that he doesn't hold it because of Hayel. That's why I couldn't accept that interpretation. Which Rabbi Yirmiyah said back to him, no. Well, Tamech, according to your reasoning, it's like shtika koidah, that he was silent, that means to say that he didn't have an answer. But what do you do with what we learned in another brisa that says, says to Yeshua, according to your interpretation, that you say that, okay, you separate the challah and just leave it and you don't bake it. What do you mean? Your option's also not good. It's become a chametz. And if you don't do like me to bake it, it's going to have chametz by your in your house. And Yeshua was silent, didn't respond. So that says, he says, what do you mean? You think he didn't respond to him? We find the Mishnah that he responded. They're not like learn the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, this is not a problem about Bayra Bayi Matzah. It says but that's this is not yours. So there's no problem. So Elashasik Leba Brisa. So that's why Rabbi Yirmiyah concludes. He says, no, obviously he was sound in the Brisa, but he responded by the Mishnah. So Chanami, Eimer Shasik Leba Masnetin. Therefore, I could also tell you that here he was sound in the Brisa, that in the second Brisa, but he responded to him in another Brisa, and then you could say that actually the Machlekes is on both points. You could say that Rabbi Eliezer holds Tebesana is man. So therefore, if you would take off like Rabbi Shua the dough and just leave it, he would violate it because of Rabbi Matzah, because it is his. Because it's Tebesana, he gets to decide who goes. And also to bake it first, there is no Isser. Why? Because you say Hayel, and you can say in each and every one that it's fit for him. Whereas Rabbi Shua held that no, Tebesana is not money, so therefore this is not his chametz, that he's prohibited to have chametz in his house. And moreover, if he would bake it first, he would violate because you don't say Hayel. So now that the Rashi just addressed it says, didn't we say in the previous stuff that everyone holds Tebesana is not money? But based on what we're saying here, this is contingent. Machlekes Rabbi Eliezer if you hold Tebesana is mammon or not. So says Rashi that part of the Gemara on the previous stuff didn't really have this brisa that Rabbi Eliezer responded to Yeshua Harei. So obviously that he considers it as money, and then we can't say that everyone holds Tebesana is in a mammon. But again, therefore the Gemara is responding that it is a good interpretation, because you see that the fact that he didn't respond to him in one place doesn't mean he doesn't hold it, but like his Rabbi Shua didn't respond and he also did hold. So therefore it's still a good interpretation that the Machlekes Rabbi Eliezer Yeshua is in this Machlekes of Rabba and Rav Chizda. Now the Gemara concludes, Tanya will learn a brisa. Rabbi Yomi says, halacha like Rabbi Eliezer, halacha like Rabbi Eliezer. What do you do with this challah tamei on Yom Tov? You first bake it and then you separate it. Rabbi Yitzchak says, now halacha geben b'seira, that what you do is you don't do either one of Rabbi Eliezer and Yeshua. You just put it into cold water to stunt its fermentation process that shouldn't become chametzik. Now the brisa continues and says, v'kamashir isa. How much is the amount of dough to knead on Pesach that you shouldn't do any more at one time, so that you could safeguard it that it shouldn't become chametzik? So B'shmo Banesh Rabbi Yechim B'Reikam, he says bechitin when regarding wheat, so then it's kav. You do 2 kav of wheat at a time. But by barley you could do shleishes kav, you could do 3 kav. He says he says the exact opposite. He says that because barley is closer to become chametzik, so therefore you can only do 2 at a time. More than wheat, which is not as quick to ferment, so you could work with more dough at a time. You could work with 3 kav. That the Gemara asks, but we're talking in the Brisa that actually Shmuel ben Leishah B'Yechim B'Reiko Eimer, who he's this opinion that we mentioned, he says actually b'chid my wheat is shleishes kav and 3 kav, not 2. And we're starting by barley, he says arba kav and 4 kav, not 3. So that contradicts his own opinion. So it's not difficult. The second Brisa is b'chasichasa, is when it's inferior quality. The first Brisa is b'mal yasa, when it's high quality, which is when you need the low grade one, so then it's only like a high quality 2 kav, which is that it ferments quicker when it's the higher quality than it is the lower quality. So therefore, by the low quality one, you could have a little bit more, then you could have this one at the high quality, and the one that you could work with more is the lower grade. Now, actually, interesting, Amr Pape says, Shema Minah, what we could infer regarding commerce is that Griyan Chiti Chasichasa Mechitim Al Yasa. It's more inferior, the inferior wheat from the high quality wheat, more than the inferiority of the inferior barley from the high quality barley. Why? Where do you see it? Because the Elohasam, whereas over there by the wheat, you find that Tilsa, you find that the good, you told me the good wheat is 2 kav, is the equivalent of the inferior wheat is 3 kav. So obviously the inferior one is a third less. Whereas Bahach over here by the barley is riva, is a quarter. We say that the good ones you can work with a 3 kav, and the inferior ones are a 4 kav, where the inferiority is only a difference of a quarter. So you see that the grade change from wheat to its inferiority and barley to its one, it's more of a change. You lose more by the lower quality wheat than you do by the barley, because there it's a third, and here it's a quarter. Now, a related discussion, Amar Rav, he says, Kav Maligna. It means the kav of that place of Maligna is the measurement lepischa. That's how much dough you shouldn't need more than that, so that you could safeguard it from becoming chametz. Before I explain this, is disagreeing with what we mentioned before regarding if it's wheat or barley, how many 2 kav, 3 kav. But this is what he says, that a kav of Maligna is the amount of dough that you could make on Pesach that it shouldn't become chametz. And mechin l'chala, so too this is the amount of dough that all year round, that if you make this amount of dough, you can be chayiv and hafrashas chala. On that the Gemara asks, but Tanya, which is actually a Mishnah, Masechtas Chalaz, between Tamid Beis, that says, Chameshes revoyim kemach, 5 quarters of a kav of flour, which is 5 quarters is 1 kav and a quarter of flour. Now, Rashi goes through a little bit of a calculation over here regarding when you're saying quarters, there's a quarter of a kav, which a leg is a quarter of a kav. So 5 lugan tziparim, which is 7 and a little bit more midbari, which that was the measurement of the omer that they had in the midbar, which was the dough they got in the midbar. Like it says regarding the hafrashas chala, it says reishis arisa seichem, the first of your doughs. You have to take the amount of your dough, which means which dough? It means the dough that they had in the midbar, which was omer l'gogoylos. Every single person had a certain amount of man, omer for every head, which is an asiris ha'efa, is a tenth of an efa. Now, we went through once before, Askelav Gudu, Aleph Samach, Lamed Kov Vez, that lets you know, efa, sa, lug, kav, and beya, and Gudu is, when you do it in a crisscross, Gimel, Vav, Dal, Vav, that tells you also a very good mnemonic to recall what Rashi is going to tell us a little bit about. The Ephah is 3 sa. A sa is 6 kavin of the midbar. So it comes out that an Ephah is 18 kavin. So if you calculate a tenth of that, because we're saying asira se'ephah is how much the omer is, you're going to come out to have a 7 quarter kavs and a beya and a fifth of a beya. As Rashi breaks this down, so all those boys that are listening that are not into arithmetic, so here we go a little bit. So what you do is that you split up those 3 sa'im, which are in an ephah, which, like I said, are 18 kavin, and you make quarter kav, which is lug, comes out in the 3 sa, you have 72 lug. You take a tenth of that 70, so you have 7. But then you have a remaining 2 lug, which are 12 beitzim, because in every lug there's 6 beitzim. A tenth of that is a beya, is an egg, and a fifth of a beya. So it comes out that you have 7 revaim and a little bit more, which that little bit more is a beya and a fifth of a beya, which is a 7 and a fifth lugan. That's how much it is if you measured with the midbari. But as we mentioned, we've gone through different dafim that said that there was 3 periods in time. You went from the midbari, they had certain measurements in the midbar. Then there was Yerushalmi. What happened to Yerushalmi? They added on the measurements what's called a shtus malavar, 6, an external 6, which is really an internal fifth. It's called chemish malagav. What does that mean to say? They took 6 of the original measurements of the midbar measurements, put it into 5 later measurements, what's called the Yerushalmi. So the 6 revaim, what's called a leg or a quarter of a kav, that was originally 6, now became 5. So the measurements got bigger. So the original 6 are now 5, which are the Yerushalmi measurements. So the Reva Hakav and the Bay and the Chaimish, which is left over, now became just a Reva, because now all that bigger measurement fits into the Reva of the Yishamas. The Reva is 6 Bayim, so now those 6 actually become now 5 larger eggs. So the Bay and the Chaimish Bay become a larger egg, because again, like we said, you add on the Chaimish Malagav, which is a Shtus Malavad. Now, so those 6 large eggs is now a new larger Kav, which again, the Yerushalmi Kav is going to be bigger, it's going to contain more than the Midbari Kav. So it comes out the Omer that was in the Midbar are 6 Revayim Yerushalmiyim. Now, another time in history, they added on later in Tzipayri, a later time in history, that the Sat Tzipayri was more than the Yerushalmi, is also Shtus Malavar, like the Gemara says in Even Daf Yomi. So it comes out, the Omer that is 6 Revayim Yerushalmiyim, then became 5 Tzipayrim. So again, what was originally 7 1/4 of the Midbari ended up becoming 6 Yerushalmi, which ended up becoming the 5 of Tzipari. That's just the explanation of why there's 5 Revayim of Kemach in this shiur. Now, there's a word over here that says Va'ay. Now, Tyson brings that Rashi does not have the gears of Va'ay, because it's actually exactly 5 Lugin Tziparim, like we just went through the calculation, which was the amount of the Isa in the middle, which Arisa says, which the shiur Chala. So what's this Chamisha Revayim Kemach Va'ay? So Rabbi Tam says that no, you could have the gears of Va'ay, because like Rabbi Yisi in Shabbos of Tezvav and Aleph, that says that actually 5 exact loigin you're going to be patur. It's only Chamisha Va'ay you're going to be chayav. And what's the reason of Rabbi Yisi? Because it means after you separate challah, then you need to remain with the shiur of Arisa Sechem, which was 5 lugin tzipayim, which was 7 1/4 of the midbari. But it's not like that's the amount that you have to have of challah. It has to have, after you take off challah, so you need a little va'id, take that off of challah. Now you're remaining with that amount, so therefore that's the amount of chayav mechallah. Now that was a little bit of a longer route, but basically the Gemara's question is, you see that it's more than the kav. You told me on the bottom of Aleph that how much is the shiur of that it shouldn't become chametz on Pesach, and how much is it that's the shiur of challah? It's kav malig. No, it's a kav. What do you mean? The halacha is that it's 5/4 of a kav. How much is 5/4? It's a kav and a quarter. So it's not just a kav; it's a kav and a quarter. So how can you tell me that it's a kav? So says yeah, kav malig nami a high shiur koi. The kav of this place malig was what we have generally a quarter, a kav and a quarter. Meaning their calves were bigger. So it is exactly like we're saying, it has to be a calf and a quarter. Now, the Gemara brings a custom that says that Amr Rabbi Yisrael says, Hani Nasha Didan, our women, Nog Lameifa, Kafisa Kafisa Lapischa. What they do is that they actually bake only 3 lugin, which is 3/4 of a calf, stringently, because they really want to be careful from chametzik. They only make 3/4 of a calf at a time when they're baking dough for Pesach. So, not to get close, because if you get near a kav, you're bordering around the amount that can become chametzik. So Abai says, my daitach, what do you mean? What are you thinking? L'chumra? You're praising the women that they're stringent? Chumra dasalei kulahu. This is a stringency that creates a leniency. Why? Because mafke la mechala. What do you mean? You're moving that from the mitzvah of chala. So remember, if we said the same amount that you could bake, that's limited, that's the end you could do, so that's the amount of the shiur challah. But if you're doing less than that, so you're never doing challah. So you think you're being machmer, you're being mekel. Amalei said to no, the women, they do like Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanya, which actually Mishnah said this challah. Rabbi Eliezer, and he says, if someone takes down the bread from the oven, and puts it into a basket, the basket combines it for the obligation of challah. So they're actually not exempting themselves from challah. They're baking it less than that amount at a time, but then they put it into the basket. The basket combines them, and therefore they can fulfill the mitzvah of challah. However, Abai asked him, but what do you mean? We learned on this that Amr Bishum lady says, we didn't learn that they could be combined together. Only the Babylonian breads, their loaves. Why? Because they bite one from the other. Meaning the breads they made were wide and round like ours. So when you attach them one next to the other in the oven, so if you ever buy those bagels or loaves or the challahs, they're biting one on the other, meaning they're connected. The doughs connect, so they're like one. So those are the breads that, even though they're separate breads, they could combine. But if they're like our matzahs, which are long and thin, and they don't bite one on the other, then light. Then we said that they cannot be combined together. So how are you saying that the women go ahead and fulfill it when they're putting the matzahs into the basket? That's not going to be combining it together to separate challah. And that says, no, he had Rabbi Yosef answer, but we had said on this, Rabbi Chanina, he disagrees. He says, no, I feel like even if they're just like these cracker-like loaves, like the matzah that we make, even though there's no neshicha, you still could go ahead and combine them in a basket and separate challah. And therefore, the women are not just being machmid asnei kula. It's a bonafide chumrah because they also could go ahead and separate that of challah. Now, Bayer Rimi had the following question regarding this about the kli combining. Tavla, if you have a tablet, she'en lo levizvizin, which doesn't have any mizgeres, doesn't have any border, a lip going around it, and he takes bread out of the oven and puts it into this tablet. Ma'al, what's the halacha? Will it combine according to Rabbi Eliezer? As Gemara explains the question. Do you need it to be inside a vessel? Well, you don't have it because there's no inside. You just need the airspace of a vessel. But you do have it because ultimately it's a tablet. Says the Gemara, take a look. It's not clear what the halacha would be in this case. Now, Tanya Lin the Brisa concluding this Gemara's discussion that we mentioned before, but Lezer he says a salmon tzafim. He said, yeah, the basket combines it. Rabbi Shloimy says no. He says even more than that. He says tana mitzarfim. He says even if you didn't put it in the basket together, just being in the same oven combines it. He says kikar shel bubble shel meshchaz. He says only, however, if it's loaves of bubble, then it combines. If it's biting one the other, then it's mistarfish. But if it's like the ka'achin, like we said, like these thin cracker-like things that are not connecting one to the other, then that's not going to be combined by just being in the same oven. We turn to the next halacha, the next Mishnah that continues on this halacha about baking dough on Pesach. And he says, "Shalish nashim lashes ka'achas." Says 3 women, they could knead their dough simultaneously. Now, meaning they had small ovens, and each woman has the amount of dough that would fill up the oven. Still, they could all knead their dough together at the same time. And they can bake in one oven, consecutively, one after the other, and there's no problem about chametz. So even though one woman is going to be waiting until the other 2 finish baking, it's okay. The amount of time that she's just waiting over there, not doing anything, is okay. It's not a problem with chametz. Chachamim, they disagree. They say they can't be so lenient that each one could be kneading at the same time. Rather, shalish nashim oistis v'batzik. These 3 women, they could be engaged in the dough, in each woman in her own dough, ka'achas at the same time, but they can't be all kneading at the same time. Why? Because achas lashe, you could have one woman, meaning we'll call her the last woman, she'll be kneading the dough. Va'achas ayreches, at the same time, one woman, the middle woman, she'll be shaping her dough. Va'achas eifa, and the third woman, which is the first one, she'll be kneading her dough. So it comes out that she who kneaded first, she's going to be baking right now. I think Gemara's going to go through that order. So you could have 3 women busy at the same time, but they're all at different stages of the dough, because you can't have them all at the same time, because then two women are just going to be sitting when the other women are doing the other process, waiting, and that's going to be a problem about chametz. Now, Kiva, he says, what do you mean? Loi kol hanashim. Not all women, meaning you have some women who are lazy, and then it's going to become chametzik if they wait so long. V'loi kol ha'etzim, not all the firewood. V'loi kol ha'tenurim, not all the ovens. You have some ovens that don't get so hot. You have some piece of wood that don't burn so fast. They're not all shavu, they're not all the same. So rather, za'aklal, this is the rule. Tafach, if it swells, meaning if the dough over here, that's in the woman's hands, she sees that it's going to start swelling to become chametzik. So tiltish, what she does, she makes her hands wet, b'tzayin in cold water, and she smears it onto the dough, and that cools it off. That prevents it from becoming chametzik. Now, time about the Brisa, which elaborates on the opinion of the Rabbanan, that they said that 3 women are a sekes b'batzik. In other words, they can't all be kneading at the same time, because then one, they're going to be waiting, but they all engage at the same time. It goes like this. It's just really an elaboration of what it says in the Mishnah. Lasha, the first woman, that she goes first to knead the amount of how much would fill up the small little oven, she goes first, and then after she kneads, he mekatefes. So when she's braiding, when she's shaping her dough, which is preparing it for the oven, then the chaver to lasha tafta. Then the second woman comes and she starts kneading her dough. Then mikatefes. Then when this first one, who up until now was shaping her dough, and she finishes that shaping, she goes now and she bakes and she puts it into the oven. Then the chaverta, her friend who up until now was kneading her dough, so she goes and she's mikatefes tachta. So she starts shaping now after her. She takes that station now. Vashlishas lasha, and now the third woman starts kneading the dough. Then Aifa, when the first one finished baking, and then the middle one finished shaping, and the last one finished kneading, so now the middle one that was shaping, she bakes. Her friend, the last woman, she now starts shaping after her. So he lasha. So the first one goes back, the one who was the first woman, who's now finished one run of matzah, she finished her baking, now she goes back and she starts kneading. As Rashi says, because the ovens were small and you could only do one woman at a time, the amount of baking. And then her friend, the second woman, she's now she bakes in her place. Now the third woman, she goes and starts shaping her dough. And this continues again and again. The word chalila is from the word of machai, like a dance. It goes around and around and around. They keep on doing this round robin. And as the Gemara explains, because as long as they're busy, engaged with the dough, it will not come to fermentation. So you got to keep on switching off. One woman doing this, kneading, one woman shaping, one woman baking, and they keep on going in a circle, around and around and around, until they finish all their dough. That was the opinion of the Chacham. Now, Kiva, he said, not all women are the same. What's this going on? Because Rabbi Gamliel had said, yeah, the three women, they could knead the dough at the same time, they could shape it at the same time. The oven's only going to fit one woman at a time. Okay, we'll wait. Now, Rabbi Kiva had a problem with that. Tanya learned the Brayso. Rabbi Kiva says, he says, I litigated in front of Rabbi Gamliel. He said that the rule is that three women can knead at the same time, and then you have one woman waiting until the other two bake. I said, our teacher, please teach us. Benashim's readers, what type of women are you talking about? Women that work quick? Benashim chain readers or lazy women? Based on lachim, you talk about moist wood, which is it's hard to burn. Like Beit Tzimi Beishim, you talk about dry wood. But Tanacham, you talk about a hot oven, or a cold oven. How can you give such a qualification? Depending on the woman and the oven and the wood, this could be a period of 10 minutes, 30 minutes. I mean, how do you? So I'm gonna leave. Gamliel said to me, you only have what the sages said, which is actually the end of the Mishnah. That Zehakal, this is the rule. Tafach, if the dough starts swelling, then you coat it with something cold with water, and that's what you do. And there's no differentiation between if it's the type of woman or the oven or the wood, doesn't make a difference. This is all going to be the same. They could all knead at the same time. Now, continuing with the laws of dough on Pesach. So there's different stages of a dough as it becomes chametzik. There's, as we'll see in our discussion, there's hichsif upanav, when the dough starts getting a little bit pale. Then there's, and you can see this with pizza dough, you see these doughs, sourdough, where it starts getting white. Then there's kikar nechagavim, which is then it starts getting like little cracks in the dough, and it starts going in different directions. Then you have siduk, which is then actually the cracks start actually folding one over the other. They start intermingling these cracks. That's even more fermented. So that we'll see as these stages in the halacha of Mishnah. Shiur. Shiur is a type of dough that it's not fully chametzik yet. Yisarif, that's the type of dough you got to burn it. But va'ichle pater, if someone eats it, it's chametz neiksha. It's not real bona fide chametz, and therefore he's not going to be chayav kars. Now, on the other hand, siduk, which is from the word of like a crack, it starts fermenting, then you get sedukin, and then you get cracks. That also you start with to burn it. But here's more severe va'ichle chayav kars. This, according to this Tana, I mean, everyone holds, but the question is what it's going to be. If you eat siduk, you're going to be chayav kars because it's bona fide chametz. Says the Mishnah Ezeu Sir. So we're going to have a machlekes regarding these two cases of what's seer and what's siduk. So what's seer? Which again, seer is not bona fide chametz. If you eat it, you're not going to get kars. So the first Tana says is kikar nechagavim. It's like the antenna of locust, which an antenna of the locust goes one way, one antenna. Another antenna goes the other way. You have a crack going one way, a crack going the other way. That's not real full-fledged chametz. You gotta burn it, but there's no kars of eating. Siduk, what's that? That you are chayav kars bona fide chametz. Shenis arvid sedak and zebeseh. Where the cracks start intermingling, crossing over one or the other, that's already bona fide chametz. That's the Rebbe Yehuda. They disagree. They say no. Both cases that you said, meaning even the karnech hagavim that you said that's only seer, that you're not going to chayav kars. No, that's also siduk, and therefore ha'ich chayav kars. Both the cases you described, the one that eats it would be chayav kars. So veizehu seer. So then, what's the case of seer that if you eat it you're going to be patur from kars? Is where there's not even a crack. So then, what is it? It's kol shechsif upanav. If the surface of the dough pales, Like a person whose hair is standing on end. Very interesting metaphor. That because of dread and fear, his face pales and his hair, like you think it's only in the cartoon, his hair stands on end, right? That's the wording of the Mishnah. And his face pales, he's like losing all the color. That is what we call shiur, and that's going to be, according to this Tana, chametz neiksha, that you're not going to be chayv kars. And as the Brisa elaborates, Tamar and Lena Brisa. Is there a shiur? What's shiur? So this Tana says, kol shesif upon, like we just said, if the surface of the dough just pales, like a person who's here standing on hand. That's shiur, that you're not chayav kars. What's siduk? That's kikar nechagavim. That's like when it has like the antennas of the locust, which it has starting having cracks, although they're not intermingling. That's the remeir. The sages, they say, no, they don't see what's shiur. That's kikar nechagavim. That's like the antennas of the locust. That you're not chayav kars. What's siduk? That's when it's arba shaduk and zebazeh, where the cracks start crossing over one on the other. And the zeh, this one and this one, kars, whoever eats is gimi chayv kars. Now first, what's pretty obvious that the chacham in the brisa is Yehuda the Mishnah, and the chacham in the Mishnah is Remeir. So although we're calling them chacham, it's really machlek Remeir and Yehuda. Just by the Mishnah we call one chacham, and the other one we say his name, another one here, fine. But we said that zeh chayv kars. But the Gemara has a difficulty with this. You just told me the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. You told me his opinion that what is shiur is kikar nechagavim. And what's siduk is that when you have the cracks that start crossing over one or the other. And then you say, tell me, and both of them, if you eat it, you chayv kars. How can you say that? Well, not with the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says clearly that shiur, if it's only shiur, you serve, you burn it, but ba'ichle potter. Whoever eats is going to be potter. Rabbi Yehuda, meaning Rabbi Yehuda exempts if you eat from kars shiur, meaning his shiur. That even though he says you have to burn it, but he says not going to be chayv, not malchus, not kars. And here the Brisa says that if you eat the shiur and the siduk, you're going to be chayv kars. So that's the Gemara aim to say, no. The way you have to read the end of the Brisa on the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is Remeir. According to Remeir, zeh v'zeh. Remeir, who is more stringent. He says either one of the siduk or even Rabbi Yehuda's shiur, ha'eichel chayv kars. Whoever eats going to be chayv kars because Rabbi Yehuda's shiur of kanech hagavim, or the siduk, which is when you have the cracks crossing over one or the other. According to Remeir, he holds they're both considered siduk, and they're going to be chayav kars. Because he holds shiur that you're exempt from kars is only if it's just the surface pale. Therefore, that's what the Mishnah, that's what the Brisa means. It's going on what Remeir would hold in this shiur of Rabbi Yehuda. And Amar Rabba concludes, says, my time to Remeir, what's the reason Remeir that he says that siduk is karnei chagavim? What do you mean? That why would that be considered that of siduk? So he says because you don't have any crack on the top. That doesn't really have many cracks in the bottom. In other words, it sounds like that everyone agrees that really it's only when this arva hasidakin that then that's considered that of siduk. But Remeir who says that already karnei chagavim is really considered siduk because although on the top you only have like the antennas of a locust, but on the bottom there's a lot of crossover, and therefore that's why he holds already considered the chametz of siduk, and therefore ha'ichle would be chayav kars. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, it comes out that it's chametz neiksha and it's not asa, and therefore it would be ha'ichle potter. And according to Meir, he holds again it's a lav, and therefore it's bazar, and therefore you would get the punishment. So as we discussed in today's daf in Pesachim Daf Mem Ches, was we said that this from the previous daf of the teaching of Rav Chizda and Rabbah, who their machlekes is regarding on Yom Tov, do we permit because of hayil, when you, let's say, making food from Yom Tov to the week, do you get lashes or not? So let's say that this is the machlekes of Rav Lezer and Yeshua in our Mishnah. That although at the end of the day, you're really going to end up separating one of the challahs, but maybe you say, hayil, since if I want to, I could really break off just a piece of each challah. Okay, so then each challah is really fit for me. So therefore, Rabbi Lezer says, yeah, go ahead, bake it first, and then separate afterwards. She says, no, you don't say hayil. You can't say that. You would end up taking off one challah. It's not fit for, it's not tzarich nefesh, and therefore that's the machlekes. Then the Gemara says, no, maybe we reject both ways. Maybe even according to Rabbi Eliezer, maybe here it's different because no, it's not fit for him at all. He already ate his last Yom Tov meal. It's only fit for the guest. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer would not say hayil over there, even though he does say in the halacha of Mishnah. And you could also reject the other way. Maybe Yeshua, maybe over there he doesn't say hayil because you're going to be separating the one challah. That's the norm of doing it. But here it is at least fit for the guest. If guests come, which is somewhat common, maybe he would agree. He would say hayil. So you can't necessarily say that would be the machlekes Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah, if you say Hoyle Nad, because I can tell you if I cared on either one of them, so not necessarily that he's like Rabbah and he's like Rav Chizda, because each Amor can tell you that the other one would actually agree, over here would be different. Then we said how much is in the Bryce, we said how much is the amount of dough to knead on Pesach. So we had a machlekes regarding first of all, wheat and barley, which one is worse, to come more chametz or not. We also said it depends if it's a high grade or low grade. And we said that the ramification regarding business dealing is that we found that the low grade wheat is more of a loss than the low grade barley, because there it's a third and by barley it's only a quarter. And then we brought that the kav malignoa is ultimately a kav and a quarter in general, which we said had halacha regarding that of Pesach, and had halacha regarding that of the shiur of challah. We said, well, a challah is a kav and a quarter, not a kav. So we said, yeah, it is the same as the kav and a quarter of general. We said women, but however, their custom is that they do need less, because they're concerned about kamei chametz. It's a chomedas lekula. No, it's not, because they fulfill the chiv of challah, because they combine it together in the basket, which we brought also machlekes in the brisa, if the oven would combine it, not just a basket. We also had a question regarding if teich, does it have to have teich? What if you have a tablet, let's say a cutting board, that you put it on, which doesn't have an inside, it doesn't have a teich, but it's on the airspace of the kli. With that also combined the quantity yaster. And we also had a discussion regarding, which we said, the women for the matzah, we conclude like the one who says even ka'achin, even if they're hard breads, they're not like gluey, glutenized breads like our breads, which they stick one to the other, that even so that the salad would have been starved, but they could be do the mitzvah challah, even though they're doing less than a shiur, because the basket will combine them. Going to the next mission, we have a machlekes regarding if you have three women that are kneading at the same time, could all be kneading, or then no, they can't all knead at the same time. They have to be engaged somewhat in the dough the whole time, so you can't just leave it. One will be kneading, one will be shaping, and one will be baking. Going to the next mission regarding shiur. The Mishnah said it's just very low on the fermentation process. You got to burn it because ultimately it's chametz. But if you eat it, you can be pot. It's not real chametz. Siduk, we said you can chayav carbs. We had a machlekes. What is shiur and what is siduk? That one opinion said shiur is when it has like the antennas of that of the locust, and siduk is that of those cracks are actually being nisarf. They're actually not just going in different directions, actually folding one over the other. The other opinion says no. Actually, both those that you said, they're both actually siduk. And therefore you're going to be chayiv cars for both the cases we described. Why? It's only kekana chagavim. As the Gemara concluded, says no, because every crack on the top is many cracks on the bottom that are actually mixing together. So therefore it is siduk. What is shiur? Something even less than that, where it's just hichsif upon, where it's just like the face of the dough becomes pale. That's the case of where we're going to say that it's only going to be like chametz neksha, where you're going to have to burn it. But if someone eats it, he's not going to have cars. Thank you to any time.